Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday. They seem to be rushing past another My Story, and I'd like to introduce and welcome Neville Shulman. Neville Shulman CBE is an explorer, a mountaineer, a writer. He's travelled to the North and South Poles, fellow of the Explorers Club and the Geographical Society. His books include Some Like It Cold and Zen in the Art of Climbing Mountains. He's raised an enormous amount of funds for a host of different charities. He's involved in the film industry and in theatre, his most notable films being Black Hawk Down, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, to name but a few. So I'll hand you over to Neville, who will give us My Story.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. And as Ron's very kindly introduced me, I'm Neville Shulman, and I work in the theatre and the arts and different aspects of the arts, like dance and philosophy. I write about philosophy and about Zen, as Ron very kindly mentioned. One of my books is called Zen in the Art of Climbing Mountains, which, by the way, I should explain is not Zen in the art of mountain climbing, but it's Zen in the art of climbing mountains, which is the mountains that all of us meet in our everyday lives, where we meet mountains that we have to overcome in one way or another. So that I am a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and I work with Earthwatch, which is a conservationist organization very much involved. So I have awards that go with these two societies. And I just wanted to make a few ground rules as we start, so that if anyone puts their hands up, I presume it means that you want to leave the room and go to the toilet, so I will wrinkle my nose so that it will be up to you when you leave or not. And if you want to do anything else like sneeze, then all of us will leave the room, the virtual room, immediately. But I want to leave it in an orderly fashion, so that it's one of those things whereby, you know, I was thinking of Rabbi Shlomo Levine, our esteemed rabbi and leader of the South Hampstead Synagogue, who is, as we know, a stalwart of the synagogue and runs it in his very efficient, very tight manner. He books no introduction, no aggravation from any of the community. So that it kind of, he reminded me really of a captain in the army, Captain Carruthers, who calls his sergeant into his office, and he says, "Sergeant Brown, yes sir." He said, "I've got some sad news, some very sad news." "Yes sir, what is this, sir?" He says, "Unfortunately, Private Smith's mother has just died. So I want you to break the news to him, but I want you to do it in a very careful and considerate manner. So that I want you to do it very gently and tactfully, as I know you will." "Yes, sir, leave it to me, sir." So Sergeant Brown goes into the mess hall where all the men are, and he says to the men, "Okay, men, listen to me. All those with mothers, put your right hand up. Smith, keep your hand down." So that I know Shlomo will understand that, and that's as far as he deals with it. So that I've been, as I've said, to many extraordinary places, to as far east as you can travel, and as far west as you can travel. But also fortunately, I've been able to explore and visit the Arctic to the North Pole, and subsequently to travel to the Antarctic to the South Pole. And I'll explain a little bit about how that came about. But first of all, I want to mention two of my mentors in life. I mean, we all need mentors, we all need teachers, and we all go back in in different ways. It's, I'm just trying to think how to express it, but my two mentors that I will talk about in more detail later, but I'm just going to mention them now. One is Sigmund Sternberg, that I'm sure that all of you know and have met in different ways. And the other one is Viscount Tony Pandy, George Thomas, who was the Speaker of the House of Commons for many years. One would say perhaps our greatest speaker of modern times. And so I was very close to both Siggy and to George, and they influenced me a lot. And it's, in a way, it's up to all of us to try and influence others in the same way, so that it would be different ways of treating people, so that, you know, I try to influence my children and of course my grandchildren, and I'm hoping that in some ways I've created some influences to all of them that they can take forward in their own ways. And when I traveled, I met some extraordinary people, different peoples in so many walks of life and so many different aspects. I've been to some exotic and incredible places from around the world. And it's all of these expeditions have really been for charity fundraising to raise, as Lawrence very kindly said, some substantial monies for different charities. And it all started in some way, the fact that I had a dream as a young boy. I think all young boys and young girls should have dreams of their own and try to think of how they're going to take things forward in their lives. But my dream, which I at the time I thought was obviously totally impossible, was to travel to the South Pole, to stand in the footsteps of my two great polar heroes who were and are Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian, and Captain Robert Falcon Scott, the British explorer, who got to the South Pole in a competition, obviously between themselves as to who would be the first. And Amundsen got there first in 1911, December 1911, and Scott, sadly for him, got there in second place in January 1912. And it was a very tough, he was, he really had a bad organization. Unfortunately, he'd gone with ponies to carry the provisions and all the equipment. And the ponies went up to deal with those terrible climatic conditions, so that he got the second. And of course, that kind of broke his heart because he'd been so keen on being the first one to be at the South Pole. And of course, to us, he's one of our great heroes. And the fact that he was second is of in a way, literal consequence, because he led the way and he was a great polar explorer. But as I say, at the time, he was totally broken, totally dispirited, and was not able to achieve his goal of being the first. So coming back from the South Pole, coming back from through the Antarctic, he and his team were really totally out of it and were unlikely, and in fact didn't make it. But one of the team, someone quite extraordinary, a guy called Lawrence Oates, and he was only 31, which is extraordinary. He was only 31, and he had, before he even went on the expedition, he had some bad leg problems, and so perhaps shouldn't have gone, but he pulled his way through. He was an inspiration then and certainly to me now, and has been. But as they were coming back from the South Pole, not having achieved their ambition of getting there in first place, he realized that he was holding back the rest of the team, and so that he thought he would do the noble sacrifice. And so at the age of 31, feeling that he wasn't able to continue and he shouldn't continue, he created those immortal words, which were, "I'm going outside, and I maybe sometime then he went outside the tent and never came back and was never found. His body was never found. And so that Lawrence Oates, at 31, sacrificed himself, but he doesn't know, but we know that his words still ring to us all. And it's one of those magnificent moments in life when some words that people say resonate throughout history, certainly through exploration history. And I will come back to that again later. So that I mentioned at the time a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and the Royal Geographical Society has its headquarters in Exhibition Road in Kensington and Gore on the corner. And there are statues on the building. One is obviously of Robert Falcon Scott, who is our great hero, our great polar explorer. And the other one is Dr. David Livingstone, who is another great explorer, mostly jungles and in hot climes. And in fact, David Livingstone was the discoverer of Victoria Falls, among other places. So that they have a statue of Scott and a statue of Livingstone on each corner. So that building is known as the hot and cold building, or the hot and cold corners, and it's part of the knowledge for all taxi drivers. If they're asked to go to the hot and cold corner, they know where it is. It's the building of the Royal Geographical Society. And as I say, on one corner is David Livingstone, on the other corner is Robert Falcon Scott. And just going a little bit aside from that, because of the name Falcon Scott, a friend of mine was someone called Falcon Stewart. Falcon Stewart was actually the son of a sculptor called Oscar Neamon. Oscar Neamon came originally from Croatia, though eventually he took up Yugoslav nationality and therefore was often known as the Yugoslav sculptor. In fact, it irritated Oscar enormously that he was known as the Yugoslav sculptor, even though he'd been naturalized and lived in Britain for 40, 50 years, still always in the papers. It was always the Yugoslav sculptor Oscar Neamon, which got up his nose to say. But Oscar fell in love, or she fell in love with him, with a wonderful lady called Patricia Villiers Stewart, from a very, very English family, obviously a non-Jewish family. And they lived together, and they had 3 children. And because Oscar, fleeing from Austria primarily, where he was working and being thrown out of the sculpture college, came to England, and they had the 3 children, and he was convinced that that Hitler and the Nazis would conquer England. And so he called his children, he chose the names Falcon, Aurelia, and Electra, on the basis that he thought that would give them a fighting chance of not being called either Jewish or related to being Jewish by having these very strange classical names. So that Oscar Neamon lived with Patricia Stewart, first of all in Pimlico, and then they built a sort of a lean-to, or I call it a sort of shed-like place on the Villiers Stewart estates, which were in Beechamwell in Oxford. And the mother of Patricia obviously was totally against this itinerant artist, this Jew from Croatian, from Yugoslavia, and try to have him thrown out of England. But fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, didn't succeed. But when he was never allowed to go to the estate, which was called Pleasantland, and when Patricia's mother died, she said, "Well, now you can come." He said, "Well, if I couldn't come when she was alive, I'm certainly not going now." And he never went there. But he had a studio in St. James Palace, which was actually given to him or loaned to him by the Queen Mother and by Sir Martin Charteris, who was also another artist. So they shared the studios there. And I used to go and see Oscar many times in his studio in St. James Palace off Pall Mall. And he was actually carrying out a sculpture of President Bourguiba of Tunisia. And for various political and other reasons, suddenly President Bourguiba couldn't come to the studio to finish off the sculpture. So Oscar, in his wisdom, said, Neville, I think you look a bit like him in some way, or your body looks like him. So would you mind posing for me, standing for me, so I can sculpt and use your body to finish off the sculpture, which he then did. So somewhere in Tunisia, there is a sculpture of President Bourguiba with his head and Neville Shulman's body. So that it's one of those things. And just briefly going back to, as I say, one of the great explorer heroes, David Livingstone, as you might recall, he was lost in the jungles of Africa, and people were searching for him. They thought that maybe he had been killed or eaten, as it was in those days. And they sent a journalist from America, a writer and journalist called Morton Stanley, to try and find him. And eventually, after months of searching, he came into this little village, this African village, and found Dr. Livingstone. And he said, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. And again, like Lawrence Oakes, those are magical historical words that will always resonate with all of us in exploration. Dr. Livingstone, I presume, just as Oakes said, I'm going outside and I maybe sometime. That's really, really heartbreaking in that way. So I was talking about the adventures of going to the South Pole and trying to find, to be the first one there between Scott and he was the second. So that it was one of those things that to be second is not necessarily to lose. And I've often tried to instill that in my own children, certainly in my grandchildren. Coming second, even getting just a place, is a magnificent thing. But obviously at the time, for some people, it's very heartbreaking in different ways. And a friend of mine, if I may call him a friend, but certainly a colleague, is the astronaut Buzz Aldrin. And Buzz Aldrin, as we all know, was the second man to stand on the moon after Neil Armstrong. And it actually, Buzz is still alive today. He's one of the old astronauts. He's either 89 or 90 now. But every time, Buzz is always introduced as the second man to stand on the moon. He got his nose quite a bit, and it became something that I think has affected him. Whereas, you and I would be very happy to be the 100th or 1000th or the 10,000th person on the moon. Buzz Aldrin, just as being the second, which was a great accolade, found that was sort of something that he found it difficult to live with. And so, as I say, my dream as a young boy was to go to the South Pole, but I thought I'd never achieve it. So I thought, how would I get there? But I put it at the back of my mind because I thought there's no way. And then, of course, as happens in life, fate takes a hand. And as I mentioned, I work in the arts. I'm a patron of the Tate, and I have been with my wife for many, many years. And at a long time ago now, Nick Sirota, who was the director of the Tate, called a meeting there and introduced an artist called Andy Goldsworthy, who's a naturalist artist, works in stone, in wood, in twigs, particularly in slate. And he was creating a project which is called Touching North. And his idea was that Andy would travel through the Arctic to arrive at the North Pole and sculpt actually at the North Pole, the first artist ever to have done so. And when Nick Sirota was talking to all of us, I think we were like 200 or 300 people there, he said, who would like to go on this expedition and join the expedition and support Andy and go in his footsteps? And of course, my hand immediately shot up. Probably I was the first. but so did 50 others who all wanted to go and be part of this expedition to the Arctic to arrive at the North Pole in the footsteps of Andy Goldsworthy. But then over the weeks ahead, as people found out that it was actually quite a dangerous expedition, there was a lot of pitfalls, a lot of troubles of traveling through the Arctic, and with a great possibility indeed that we might not even make it. And it was indeed also very costly. So gradually, one by one, people dropped out for all kinds of reasons, whatever excuse they came up with. But in the end, there were only 2 people left, myself and my friend Penny Gavette, and we still decided that we would continue. And so the gallery owner for Andy, who's Fabian Carlson, was also Norwegian, very, very kindly, very nobly, very generously decided to go ahead with the expedition, even though economically it didn't now make any sense with just 2 and Fabian and another Norwegian called Eric Mustad traveling with us. So that we made it, and we traveled through the Inuit villages, and eventually there was a lot of problems, and some of it is revealed in one of my books. I think, as Lawrence very kindly mentioned, Some Like It Cold, and Andy was also stuck in the Arctic and wasn't able to move forward. And so eventually he arrived at the North Pole, and I arrived with Penny and Fabian and Eric one day later. And Andy had worked through the whole night creating these sculptures. I don't know if I hold it up to the screen, whether you can actually see it, but those are what he actually created at the North Pole. And these are 4 voids, which room, an open space. Very, very beautiful, very, very large blocks of ice that he carved with his Inuit assistant. And so when we arrived on the Cessna, by the way, the Cessna, when it arrived at the North Pole in the Arctic, it had to stay there with its engine running. The thing was that we were to take Andy and his colleagues back with us. And they couldn't turn the engines off. If you turn the engines of a Cessna off in that region, it's very likely that it will sink beneath the ice and you'd be trapped there for whatever period of time until someone could try, hopefully, and come and rescue you. So the engine was kept running for the number of hours that we were there. So when I came off the Cessna, I saw this very bearded character over on the ice. So I bounded towards him, and as the words I mentioned of Morton Stanley, I said, "Mr. Goldsworthy, I presume," and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I'm so pleased. I've travelled all the way through the Arctic to get to you, and I brought with me for you to show you one of your catalogues, which I would like you to sign." And I produced this catalog, which is here. And I said, "Would you mind signing?" He said, I'll do better than that. I will do a drawing and I sign it and dedicate it to you. So I don't know whether that's possible to read in any way, but it's a copy of one of those voids that I showed you just now, which it says "Touching North," dedicated to Neville Shulman, on April the 24th, 1989. So as I say, that was 31 years ago. And it is in fact the only artwork that's ever been produced and kept from the Arctic, from the North Pole, certainly. So that's something of something really, really special. So I'm very, very, very lucky about that. So that after obviously going to the North Pole, I then felt that obviously, somehow I've got to get to my dream, to the South Pole, and so some years later it was, of course, I managed to set up an expedition to go to the South Pole and go through Punta Arenas, and Punta Arenas, by the way, is the windiest city in the world at the bottom of Argentina and the peninsula. And it's a place that is, it's so windy. Actually, you don't see any old people there. None of us would survive now in Punta Arenas. And when you walk along, you have to hold on to the lampposts and to the railings, otherwise you'd be swept away. The winds are so fierce. And then going through that region, eventually I got myself onto the team. We stayed at in this tented area for explorers, and we travelled out on a twin otter, which we had to stop at an intermediate place called White Plains in order to refuel. It shows you how long the distances are, that you can't make it in one hop, and you have to actually stop. So we stopped, and the petrol barrels that had been petrol drums that had been left there previously by different flights in, or by the larger bomber flights that one uses. You have to open them. Of course, they're totally frozen, so you have to chip away with some sort of axe or some strong instrument in order to open them, and then refuel by putting a pipe through from the barrel into the plane. And then we flew on and arrived eventually at the South Pole, where I had my dream all that time ago. And I should explain, by the way, that the Arctic, in the North Pole region, is a frozen sea, so it's constantly moving. So that you have to be very lucky sometimes that when you stop somewhere, you camp somewhere, the next day you could be 5 kilometers away because the sea has moved. So it's a very tricky situation. Whereas the Antarctic, the South Pole region, is a frozen landmass. So strictly speaking, it doesn't move. But in reality, it moves a fraction. So it might move a few millimeters or a few centimeters per year. So when I arrived at the South Pole, the pole where Amazon Scott had been there in 1911, 1912, was some like 15 meters away from where the South Pole is now. But fortunately, they have the pole commemorating Amazon Scott, and they have the existing new pole, so you can stand and be photographed at both. And then there is the big encampment there, the scientific encampment, which is called Scott Amazon Station, which is built underground, and whereby scientists go and spend some 6 months of the year underground. I mean, it's so intimidating for those that there's all sorts of stories. I don't think they're apocryphal, but there are stories of people fighting and going crazy when they're playing chess and trying to stab each other and whatever. So they don't normally allow people in, but fortunately, they for whatever reason, they decided they would allow me and my co. So I just had the pilot Max Wendham with me and my co explorer, South Pole explorer Ian Ford, and we were allowed in. And I remember these hairy creatures come bounding towards me, and they were I think they were only the women, but imagine what the men were like. So I think I'm fair to say that I'm probably the only Jewish person to have stood at both the North and South Poles. I'm not even certain how many, if any, Jewish people have been to either pole, but certainly I think I am the only Jewish person to have stood at both poles, so that has its meaning. So I mentioned previously the mentors that have influenced me so greatly in my life. And the first one that I want to talk a little bit about is Viscount Tony Pandy, George Thomas. And Viscount Tony Pandy was a devout Methodist and someone with great religious conviction, but he loved Israel, had a great love to Israel, so that I took him to Israel, and Emma, my wife, and myself took George with us to Israel for the bar mitzvahs of our two sons, Alon and Lee. And that was a momentous occasion, and it was great that I was able to do that and repay some of George's kindnesses to me over many years. George became the president of the children's charity, which at that time was called National Children's Home. So as was his wont, whenever he was involved in something, he'd say, Neville, and I'd say, yes, George, and so I want to be involved. And so I became a vice president of the National Children's Home and set about raising monies for them in different ways and working with George on many different charitable activities. And I then set up the George Thomas Society foundation within the charity, and I was the chair of it. And I remember as speakers, we had people of like Sheikh Yamani, who spoke to us about the situations in Saudi Arabia. And he was a great speaker, a good friend of George Thomas, obviously, and he became a good friend of mine. And I carried out many expeditions, but my first expedition for the National Children's Home was to climb Mont Blanc. And Mont Blanc is the highest mountain in Western Europe. And it's a tough mountain. In fact, a lot of people die on it every year. A minimum of 30 people die every year. Sometimes up to 90 people die. They don't, obviously for various reasons, publicize that because they want people to go back to Mont Blanc. It's a tough mountain. But I managed to get to the top of it. And I was sponsored, or I always, by the way, I always pay for all the expedition costs myself. So all the funds that are given to charities go 100% to the charity. And people at that time, it's some years ago now, didn't think that I would make it, of course, to the top of Mont Blanc. So cleverly or cunningly, they said they would sponsor the last 15 meters or something of that kind. The only one I remember who got a bit overwhelmed was Viscount Portsmouth, who somehow thought they had to sponsor every foot, every meter, and ended up paying something like £35,000 as a sponsor for just from himself. I think when he realised that other people only paid £500 or £1,000, he was a bit annoyed. But I think he eventually forgave me, and it was pleased because he knew it was for such a very good cause. And as I say, I continued my relationship with George Thomas throughout his lifetime, and he often used to invite us to Speaker's House to participate in some of the dinners there. And I recall one dinner when the new Danish ambassador had been appointed, and he was welcoming him, and when George was speaking, he was talking about that it's always difficult being the new boy on the block, either as an ambassador or as a minister, and how do you cope with it when there are problems? And what George said, well, he said, the secret is always to have 3 letters. Aha, said the ambassador, well, that's great. What are the 3 letters? Well, the first letter, you put the 3 letters in a drawer, and when you get into problems in your career or when the public or anyone else are attacking you, you go to the drawer, you take out the first letter. The first letter, you open it, and it says, blame your predecessor. All the problems are relating to what he did and didn't do. And so therefore it's the way that you can actually go forward and continue. Good, so that's the first letter. He said, okay, then subsequently when things are again going awry, again a lot of problems occurring, and you go to the drawer and open the second letter, and the second letter says, blame the economy. as President Bush said, it's the economy, stupid. You blame the economy, and that gets you through another period. And then, of course, when again people are attacking you and you don't know what to do, you go to the drawer, you take up the third letter, and the third letter says, prepare 3 letters. So that's how you continue in politics or in other similar ways. George, had lived a long life, but he died of cancer. He had some very tough times in the end. And the most amazing thing is that I was given the great honor of speaking at Llandaff Cathedral at his funeral service in order to talk about George and his life and to read a lesson from the Old Testament. And again, I think I'm probably the only Jewish person that has ever spoken at Llandaff Cathedral, and it was a great moment. And I acknowledge George. He did so much for myself and Emma and for our children. So we remember him very, very deeply and with great emotion. And then switching now to my other second mentor, the fabulous Sir Sigmund Sternberg. As you know, those that knew him, Ziggy spoke in a very fractured Hungarian accent. You could understand him, but he never lost that Hungarian accent, and it lived with him always. Whereas George had this built-in melodic Welsh voice, order, and it was great to have them both. But they were both very vain. I mean, which is extraordinary because Ziggy was made a papal knight, so that he was knighted by Pope John Paul. And he was also knighted by Harold Wilson, because Ziggy was the treasurer, I think, to the Labour Party. So we always used to say of Ziggy Sternberg that he was twice knightly, though I never quite understood what it meant, but I remember him being called Ziggy twice knightly. Whereas as George, as a Methodist and as a great Labourite, was vain in his own way. I mean, I remember he used to say to me, "I'm against privilege, but I love it." and that was the wonderful George and the wonderful Ziggy. And in fact, the strange thing is that when Ziggy had a memorial service after he passed away in the Middle Temple, I was given again the great honor of speaking at the service, and I spoke. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke, and Tony Blair spoke, and I spoke. So I'm very privileged to that. I think maybe now I should try and switch to the mountains. Just let me know if I'm running on too much or talking too much. But I'm here as a mountaineer and explorer. So that I mentioned about Mont Blanc and about the racing considerable funds there. So after climbing Mont Blanc, it's my Zen philosophy that I carry with me. What do you do after one mountain? So it's like the sound of one hand clapping. Obviously, what is better than one mountain is two mountains. So then I chose the two highest mountains in Africa to climb back to back, which is Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, and Kenya in Mount Kenya. So that the idea was for me to climb up Kilimanjaro, climb in Tanzania, climb down, fly over to Kenya, climb up Mount Kenya, and then back down again, and again to raise, as I did, considerable sums of money for different charities. So that with my charities, I raised money for the National Children's Home and for cancer research and Jewish care, and many others indeed. So that, by the way, I should mention that today is May the 24th, and which is actually the birth date of Queen Victoria. I'm sure that you all know that it's the birth date of Queen Victoria, May the 24th. But it just recalls to me that many years ago, she was looking for a present, a birthday present, for her cousin, who was a Kaiser Wilhelm of Prussia, that was in charge of, and is so-called owned in their own way, Tanzania that is now, but in those days it was called Tanganyika. And Queen Victoria owned or controlled in her own way Kenya. So inside Kenya was this mountain, Kilimanjaro. And so she actually gave Kilimanjaro as a birthday present to her cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm. And so if you look at the maps of Africa and you see the straight line, between Tanganyika as it was, Tanzania as it is now, and Kenya, you'll see this little quirky half circle, which is taken out of the map of Kenya, passing over the mountain into Tanganyika as it then was, into her cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm. Those were the days when you could give mountains away. And if my birthday is December 2nd, anyone's looking for a birthday present from me, I wouldn't mind a mountain, etc. So after climbing the two highest mountains in Africa, I then had to think, what do I do next? How do I top that, or how do I equal that? And I went and thought, well, I found out about the two highest mountains in Australasia. And they're actually two mountains that are based in Indonesia, in one of the island areas called Papua New Guinea. It's actually now called Western Papua, but in those days it was called Papua New Guinea. And the two mountains are Carsten's Pyramid, which is the rock mountain, and Nagapulu, the ice mountain. So I again went there to climb and to try and achieve the summit of both of those, and again to raise money for my different charities. Again, as I say, carrying all the expedition costs myself, so 100% of any money raised always goes totally to the charities. And the only thing is to get to these mountains in Australasia through Indonesia, you have to trek through this very virulent malarial areas, jungle areas, which are really tough beyond measure. The mosquitoes are very, very, very virulent. We actually had two doctors on the team, quite a large team, and I said, what should I take? And they said, don't take anything. There's nothing that kills them. The only thing you can do is to wear long sleeves and try to keep yourself wrapped up through the jungles. Obviously, when you get to the mountains, the mosquitoes don't exist. So if you're living on a mountain, it doesn't. But I ignored that doctor's nil advice, and I actually took the hydroxychloroquine, which is the one that's in the news at the moment. As you know, President Trump has been taking it for 1 or 2 weeks, and I took it then, and it's something that I would highly recommend against malaria. I wouldn't recommend it against the COVID-19 virus. I certainly would recommend it if you're ever trekking in malarial situations. And very briefly, through the areas that I was traveling, there was a tribe there called the Dhani Tribe, and the Dhanis are a prehistoric tribe. They actually were only discovered like 70 or 80 years ago, and the Stonehenge, they wear nothing except some sort of small covering in the nether regions, shall we say, and they gave me all kinds of wonderful. I got very friendly with the Dhanis. I mean, again, they're not educated in our sense, but they're wonderfully interesting, creative, gorgeous peoples that I was able to communicate in my own way. I couldn't speak their language, they couldn't speak my language, but we found a common relationship, a common core, and so that I was given by the Dhani chief, I was given a special stone axe that I have with me here. I won't bother to show it to you now, but and I was also given these spears, which I might just grab them and see that these are the spears they use for catching birds and things. And you can actually see the arrows, the three-pronged spears that I was able to bring back with me. I mean, those are the days when you could travel on aircraft and carry these things with you. And what else have I got? Okay, well, lots of goodies in different ways. Here's the stone axe that the Dhani chieftain gave to me, which is very, very, very wonderful. So that it's something that hopefully I'm sure you can see very clearly. I've got lots of things of that kind. I kind of remember, you know, I was talking about the dangers of that area, so that one expeditioner that came back from a similar region and was put into isolation. It's appropriate of now, because we're all in isolation in our own different way. And he was locked into this little chamber room. And they said, we're going to give you, we're going to put you on a diet of pizzas and pancakes. He said, will that cure me? They said, no, it's the only thing we can slip under the door. And so after that, my jokes get worse as I continue on. But so after that, I kept climbing, and I climbed in many other countries. Tibet is one of my favorite countries. In fact, I was meant to be going back to Tibet this year, but obviously it's very unlikely that I will go, and who knows if I'll ever go now, because to go to Tibet, you have to go through China, and that itself has its own implications. But I'm very close to the Tibetans, and I met the Dalai Lama on two or three occasions. And I've also climbed one of my favorite climbing places in Bhutan. And Bhutan, which is a tiny Himalayan kingdom, just at the bottom of Tibet and just above India. And I've been there several times and climbed up in the snow passes, trying to find the snow leopard. And fortunately, I didn't find the snow leopard, because if I found the snow leopard, it would mean that he would find me, and he's a very vicious animal. But one of the times I was climbing with my Bhutanese guides, and we got to a certain level, and they said, Neville, this is as far as we're going for whatever reason. I don't know whether it's because of the snow leopard or other reasons, but they said, we're not going any further. I said, well, just wait for me here, and I'm going to go up to the summit. And I managed to get to the summit myself. But then I also, when I was climbing, I found that in that region they have blue sheep, they're called, but they have these long horns here. And I found this one horn, as you see, it's like a shofar. and I'm sure Shlomo would like to take it from me and utilize it in some way, but it's a beautiful thing. And when I brought it down, I then actually subsequently spoke to one of the ministers, the foreign minister of Bhutan, and I said, am I allowed to take it out of the country? And he said, well, Neville, you didn't kill it, you didn't buy it, and you just found it, so I'm going to give you this permission. He gave me a written permission, so that when I left Bhutan, I was able to bring it back with me, and I have it as one of my prized possessions. And one of the occasions when my wife Emma always kept saying to me, take me to Bhutan, take me to Bhutan. I said, no, it's too tough, it's too problematic, there's no way that I'm going to take you. And then we got invited to the coronation of the new king. And she said, you must take me. And of course I said, yes, I will take you. And in Bhutan, there is a fabulous place which is called the Tigerness Monastery. And it came about because the Tibetan leader, priest, called Guru Rinpoche, flew into Bhutan on the back of a tiger, as one does, and landed on the side of this mountain, this very high mountain, and brought Buddhism from Tibet to Bhutan. So to honor him, they built on the side of the mountain. They built a monastery, the Taksan Monastery, but it's always known as the Tigerness Monastery because of Guru Rinpoche flying in on the tiger. And so I said to Emma, would you like to climb to that? And I said, it's tough. And she said, yes, no. But in the end, her spirit won through, and she climbed and got to the top with me to the Tigerness Monastery. So it's one of the great feats that Emma and I share together, of being able to go there. And at the same time, of course, we then were invited to the coronation of the king and met the king, and he gave me this gold medallion, which I put on especially to show you today, which I wear. I'm a part of the Bhutan society in England, the meets every year. And we have a special celebration, and I always put it on there. So that that was another great expedition, and again raised a lot of money. And then I continued climbing through many other different places. I'm not quite certain how long you wanted me to go on talking. I can keep until someone says,
"Hi, Neville. It's Lauren." Yeah, look,
you want 5 more minutes?
I'm enthralled by your story, but I think we need obviously to go on and finish. But I want to give enough time for some questions and answers. I think that would be.
I'm not keep talking, and then let's go. But tell me when I got another
5 minutes, and then we'll open it for Q&A, because we don't want to run well over an hour. Okay.
Okay. So if I can just quickly keep talking. I wanted to mention that one of the other great places that I went and traveled to was Armenia, climbing in the Caucasus Mountains. Armenia is a wonderful country. The Armenians are a beautiful people. They're very poor, they're very impoverished, and it's strange that because Armenia is the first Christian country in the world. It's the first country that adopted Christianity as its main or its only religion. And so that carries that with it. But they've suffered a lot, the Armenians. They have been in contact with the Azerbaijanis, and particularly with Turkey, where unfortunately there have been genocides carried out against the Armenians. And in part of Armenia was this amazing mountain called Ararat. Ararat is not in Armenia anymore, it's in Turkey. But when you stand in Armenia, every day you can see the mountain Ararat in Turkey across the border. And it's heartbreaking, so that every day the Armenians are saddened by the sight of the mountain that they lost. And they have Ararat Square, they have Ararat wine, they have a lot of their items and places are called after the mountain, Mount Ararat. But it's sad, so they see it every day as a symbol. And in Armenia, I had some wonderful experiences, but again, time is against me, so I'll have to do that on another occasion. I also climbed in its neighboring country in Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan, because of the conflict with Armenia, you have to be very careful not to let one country know that you're climbing in the other country. And in Azerbaijan, they have the mountain Jews, which are the Jews that used to live in mountains. I met a number of them. They seem to be relatively happy within the circumstances, but you never can be certain, because what they say with others looking on and what they would say in their hearts are often different things. The strange thing about Azerbaijan, by the way, is that the big oil company or oil exploration company is the Noble Oil Exploration Company, and it's the Noble family that set up in Sweden the Nobel Peace Prize and the Nobel Prize for Literature. And it's strange that no one really connects it, that they made their monies out of oil exploration in Azerbaijan, which is how it all came about. So that in climbing, the one maxim that I would leave with you, perhaps, maybe I'll finish on that, Lawrence, as I can see you winking at me, I think, is the saying that I always carry with me, which is the Russian proverb, "Doverai, no proverai," which means trust but verify. Doverai, no proverai, trust but verify. Because when you're climbing, you can reach up onto a rock, and you hold onto a rock which has been there, it seems, for thousands of years, and suddenly that rock will come away in your hand, and you're gazing down into the void, and there's nothing, it seems, that will stop you tumbling down, except hopefully your Zen or your other abilities. So in life, I will leave you with that one thing. Well, maybe I'll leave you with something else as another final point. Really, is that they say if you want to be happy for a week, you should buy a cow. And they say, forgive me ladies, but they say if you want to be happy for a month, you should take a wife. But if you want to be happy for a lifetime, then you should plant a garden. So I think I will end by saying, I wish you all many, many gardens in your life. Plant a garden. Nature, conservationists. Good luck to you all. Thank you. One hand clapping, is that?
Thank you, Neville. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to open up the questions, but I have my first question, which it seems that you took up mountaineering, mountain climbing, not at a young age. So you must have been, you know, approaching 50 or when you first started, and you don't mention the difficulties. I mean, and the training and getting yourself in shape, and you must have done this every year. So could you just explain what sort of hard training, and did it change your life physically? I mean, are you much fitter than?
Well, I train every day. I exercise every day to either a greater or lesser degree, but I believe in exercise, and I believe on a permanent basis. And as I say, didn't probably explain it sufficiently, but when I was climbing Mont Blanc for the National Children's Home. By the way, the National Children's Home changed its name to the NCH. It's changed its name again to Action for Children. And I've stayed with it all those years, so that, as I say, I was a vice president with George Thomas originally, and now I'm an ambassador, and I work with the Action for Children. It's the largest children's charity in this country. But when I was looking for ways of raising money for the National Children's Home, and I saw that there was an expedition to climb Mont Blanc, and someone had dropped out, and they had one place going, and I volunteered. And I volunteered really because with our kids, a lot of the kids who are from are either disabled or deprived backgrounds, we always said, these kids climb a mountain every day. And that sort of resonated with me. So I thought, well, if they can climb a mountain every day, even though I was not a climber in those days, I volunteered. And so I trained for Mont Blanc by running up and down Highgate Hills with a backpack, which I used to put books in to carry weight. And I would put in more and more books every day and get hopefully stronger and stronger. But of course, it doesn't mean much about climbing on a mountain. When I volunteered for this expedition to climb Mont Blanc, they didn't say to me, have you climbed before? They just said, okay, if you want to. It's a bit, I always say it's a bit like being a high diver. If you go to a swimming pool and you go up to the top diving board to dive off, no one says to you, show me your certificate, show me that you've done it before. They just say, go ahead and dive. So it's the same with mountaineering. No one said to me, have you climbed before? And I had to learn on the job, and I had some quite wonderful experiences. And one of my first books, as I said, is called Zen in the Art of Climbing Mountains, because it's about the mountains that all of us overcome or try to overcome in our lives as we process and go forward. So the answer is, and obviously when my age, I have a Zen age, because what it is that when I climb now, most of the climbers I'm climbing with are half my age. And so I don't reveal my age to them, because they wouldn't want me doddering along with them. So that I'm slower, but I'm still good. And they always zoom off on a fast pace, and I'm plodding away, catching up. But when I catch them up, which I do, I'm very good at altitude, which is my big benefit in life. So I'm good at climbing at high altitude. So then we balance up with their speed and strength and my high altitude prowess. So that's it.
Any questions? If you've got a question, unmute yourself, or I'm going to put you on gallery view so I can see. Anyone putting their hand up? Harry Simmons? Harry, can you unmute yourself?
What have you done?
Can you unmute yourself?
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Neville, well done. Nice to see you. Apart from when you got married, what's been the scariest moment of your life?
It's funny you should say that, because as you know, I'm married to an Israeli. Yeah. My friends are you crazy? The Israelis don't take prisoners. So that Emma and I have enjoyed many wonderful years together. We've been on many exploits. We've traveled together. I mean, we've done some good expeditions, and with our kids, we've been to Ecuador and Peru and Machu Picchu and all sorts of wonderful things. So that my scariest moments are, I mean, it's like people say to me, you know, what is your best expedition? And I always say the next one, you know, because it's always, you've got to look forward ahead. You've got to, you know, as like now, we've got to get through this pandemic, look forward ahead and go on. It's the future, which is always great. And obviously, you know, the most amazing thing now is looking at the wonderful clear skies and thinking how much nature has gained from the pandemic. And so, you know, I don't know whether David Attenborough is chortling away. He's such a great man, you know, again, one of my modern heroes, David. And, you know, I know that he was so worried that we were misusing the planet. So this has given us a chance. We can now reevaluate ourselves. So let's reevaluate everything and move forward in a special way. Is that an answer or not an answer?
Tell me which was your scariest moment.
Well, as I said, I don't accept. I mean, you know, on a mountain, you know, there are many times when I've been absolutely terrified. I've prayed to Hashem and said, please get me down this mountain. I will never climb again. And of course, you know, I break my promise almost as soon as I hit the ground running. You know, so that there are many scary moments on mountains. And as I say, Doverai no proverai. You know, trust but verify. And you can never rely on a mountain. A mountain is a living, breathing thing, so it's always moving there. It's not static. Sometimes people think that mountains just stay like that, but they're not. They change, they vary. It depends. You can be climbing in beautiful sunshine. You just go around the corner of a mountain, and suddenly the most horrendous wind, you know, a tornado almost, will try and whip you off the mountainside. And I slept on mountain ledges, and I sleep, as Emma was saying, I sleep in a straight line. I never vary, and I'm used to sleeping on mountains on a tiny stone ledge, and knowing that you can't roll to the left or to the right, but just go sleep in one straight line, otherwise you might end up at the bottom. So there are always scary moments, but there are too many exhilarating moments which would compensate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Raise your hand.
We have a young question over here.
Lovely.
Hello.
Hi. Hi.
Ollie.
Oh,
Ollie.
Just South Pole with you.
Say that again.
Can I go to the South Pole?
Can you go to the South Pole? I definitely think that you definitely could. You've got the spirit. You've got the feeling. Yes, you're definitely an explorer in being.
Can I come too?
I look forward to going with you to the South Pole, Harley.
Can I come too, please?
Yes, Felix, I want you to come with me, very much so. You're both explorers. Raphael and Laura.
Granddad, I know, check your messages. There's something on it.
Good. Next.
Can I? Sorry, could I ask about your film background? How did that happen? And what have you done in that regard?
I can't hear what you're saying, but I know you're saying something.
Ah, sorry.
Go on. No, I hear.
Documentary maker. I'm interested to know what you've done in the film world.
And what have I done in the film world? Well, it's a long story. I mean, it's almost like another lecture. But I'm director of Shepperton Film Studios. I was director of Pinewood Film Studios. I worked with Ridley Scott on all his films as his manager and advisor. So I worked with Gladiator and Blade Runner, and his most recent large film was The Martian with Matt Damon, and the most recent film was All the Money in the World, with which is the Getty story, and as you know, it had to change its actor halfway through from Kevin Spacey was the original actor, and then it became Christopher Plummer. So I'm one of the few people, there are a few others, but one of the few people that have seen All the Money in the World with Kevin Spacey, who's a terrific actor, and Christopher Plummer, who's a terrific actor. But obviously Christopher Plummer, I think, was closer to Getty in age and look, so it worked out well. So that and if you want me briefly to tell you a story about Gladiator. I mean, Gladiator, when Ridley was casting Gladiator, I said, you can't use those actors. You've chosen the two most alcoholic, drunkest actors in the world, which is Richard Harris and Oliver Reed. I said, you know, those are going to cause a huge. He said, don't worry, Neville. You know, they both promised me they will never drink on set. And Richard Harris didn't. He kept his word, but unfortunately he was very wasted. Unfortunately, he died a few months later after Gladiator was released. But Oliver Reed, who played the circus master, the Gladiator master in the film, just never stopped drinking when they were shooting. They created the Colosseum in Malta, and every night, you know, he would go into the bar, really would go and have one drink with him. Then he said, I could see that look in his eye, and Oliver would just keep drinking all night long until, unfortunately, he had a heart attack and died on Malta. And the end of Gladiator, I don't know, you know, if you can recall it at all, but the end of Gladiator was meant to be that, you know, that the emperor had died, you know, and Marcus Aurelius and Maximus, the Gladiator, and Russell Crowe had died, and Oliver Reed, as the circus master, was meant to say in the middle of the arena, the Colosseum, meant to say, "Oh, the madness of war," a bit like, you know, the actor at the end of The Bridge Over River Kwai is meant to say, "Madness about it all," and he was meant to make this long speech because he died, and so they couldn't do that, and so they had to reshoot. They had to create a scene where they had a double for Oliver Reed walking away, Emma getting stabbed in the back, and Emma's killed, and then when they had the final scene in the arena with the Colosseum, that the dead people, they wrote and created that the spirit of Maximus, the gladiator, would rise up out of the arena and go and join his dead wife's and son's spirit in the clouds. And if you write that and think about it, it sounds the most naff thing in the world. You think there's no way going to take it, but somehow it worked. And Gladiator, I think, is one of most people's favorite film. It's a great film. So that, but there's many stories behind the scenes of that kind.
Neville.
Amazing.
Neville, how did you get into the film industry?
I turned left at the stop sign instead of going right. I just made a mistake, and suddenly I was in. I mean, it's a lifetime ago. And if you're asking how do you get into the film industry, that's a secret. But I'm a writer. I've produced films myself, short films, and I worked in the film industry in so many different ways. To explain how I got into it it's too long a story. Another time. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Let me know if you need any shopping.
Well, we do need someone for our next film, actually, who stands on the top of the mountain and in the first scene gets pushed over and crashes down and dies. Would you be interested in volunteering? I'm looking for
a very tall mountain
to go in the first 10 seconds.
If it's completely safe, yes.
No, it's not safe. It's a bit like Laurence Olivier in The Marathon Man. He kept saying, "Is it safe? Is it safe?" The answer is, filmmaking is not safe.
No, I'm not going to do it.
Neville, I think we're going to have to finish here. We've rolled well over 12 o'clock, but it's been fascinating, and thank you so much. I mean, you're an amazing example of someone who not only has a dream, but follows it and chases it and lives it. And I think that's a lesson for everybody. And I think we've all got a dream at the moment that we can come out of lockdown and get back to.
I want to add one word. Neville,
I
enjoyed so much your talk as always. I miss you, and I'm so happy to see you and the children and the grandchildren. I don't see Emma, I don't know why, but come to Israel. We don't have Corona anymore.
we will see you soon. Don't worry. We will see you soon. We want to see you.
Okay.
Don't worry. I will see all of you very soon. And as I say, there are pluses and minuses in everything in life. And think how much it's made us all stop and think about our lives. So we're all gaining. We're gaining as well as losing in life. You have to be positive as well as positivity overcomes negativity.
Thank you